Welcome to the 2022 Denver Energy Code Highlights for Commercial and Multifamily Buildings training. My name is Libby Coleman, and I am an Energy Project Manager with Group 14 Engineering. This training was developed in partnership with Denver Community Planning and Development and the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. This training is a high-level summary of certain key changes to the commercial provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This training will cover commercial provisions, which also includes multifamily buildings or R1 and R2 occupancies. R3 and R4 occupancies, 3 stories and less, are regulated under the residential provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Please refer to the full 2022 Denver Building Code on the City and County of Denver's website for full code language. For additional training and code resources, please visit denvergov.org/net0. The City and County of Denver has set forth energy efficiency and decarbonization goals for new and existing commercial and multifamily buildings. In order to meet these goals, Denver has put together a timeline for the adoption of the 2022 Denver Energy Code and the Energized Denver Ordinance for existing buildings. Please review this timeline to understand when the 2022 Denver Energy Code and various policies of the Energized Denver Ordinance go into effect. This chart shows the progress needed to meet the city's 2030 net zero energy goals. It shows estimated carbon emission intensity for previous and current code cycles. The net zero energy trajectory path is represented by the blue dashed line, with the goal that buildings are designed as net zero energy by 2027 and perform as net zero energy by 2030. The blue dot, labeled DEC 2019, represents the 2019 Denver Energy Code. The blue dot, clouded in green, labeled DEC 2022, represents the 2022 Denver Energy Code. For commercial and multifamily buildings, we are following the trajectory line to stay on path towards our 2030 net zero energy goals very closely. The 2022 Denver Energy Code has made great progress in reducing building carbon emissions. The following topics and provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code are covered in this training. This is not an exhaustive list of all of the changes from the 2019 to the 2022 Denver Energy Code, but a selection of those that have been identified as the biggest or most impactful changes for design and construction teams. Minimum insulation requirements are now in place for certain above-grade opaque envelope components. This is a mandatory requirement and must be met for all new construction projects regardless of the compliance path chosen. The minimum insulation requirements are regulated by component U factor. The mandatory minimum insulation U factors are not as stringent as prescriptive U factors listed in section C402.1.4. It should also be noted that the prescriptive insulation requirements for certain opaque assemblies were increased from the 2019 to the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Code sections covering air barriers and air leakage testing have been updated in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This mandatory provision requires continuous air barriers, verification at installation, and testing of building air leakage. Air leakage testing has been modified in the 2022 code to now require the measured air leakage to be at or below a CFM per square foot target. Due to the 2022 Denver Energy Code air leakage requirements covered on the previous slide, the Denver Mechanical Code states that ventilation must be provided by mechanical means to all dwelling units regardless of building height. This means dwelling units are not allowed to rely on natural ventilation via operable windows. Furthermore, the Denver Mechanical Code does not allow for exhaust-only ventilation as a mechanical ventilation strategy in any building type. Where mechanical ventilation is provided or required, such as in dwelling units, ventilation must be provided by a combination of supply and return or supply and exhaust air. HVAC fault detection and diagnostics is a new mandatory requirement for new buildings with an HVAC system serving a conditioned floor area of 25,000 square feet or greater. Systems that are exempt include those serving warehouse buildings with heating-only systems and those serving R1 or R2 occupancies. An example of a system where fault detection and diagnostics is required would be an air handling unit serving areas of an office building totaling to more than 25,000 square feet. Economizers are a prescriptive requirement carried over from the 2019 Denver Energy Code. The requirements for chilled water system economizers have not changed. For individual fan systems, the cooling capacity, which triggers the need for an economizer in buildings other than Group R, has been reduced to 33,000 BTUs per hour. Given that economizers are a prescriptive requirement, a project may pursue a performance compliance pathway for a design without economizers. Starting January 1st, 2024, fossil fuel warm air furnaces and electric resistant space heating equipment is not permitted for space heating. This mandatory requirement is put in place to align the new construction code with the Energized Denver ordinance for existing buildings, specifically focusing on the easy to electrify systems where heat pump equipment is readily available and feasible. There are many circumstances where exemptions may apply, with a few notable ones being allowance of electric resistance for heat pump supplementary heat, the wattage per square foot exemption intending for the allowance of electric resistance heat on VAV systems, and that a project may utilize electric resistance space heating if a performance compliance path is pursued. Starting January 1st, 2024, fossil fuel and electric resistance instantaneous and storage water heaters are not permitted for water heating. It is important to note that this requirement does not apply to water heating systems with separate storage. This mandatory requirement is put in place to align the new construction code with the Energized Denver ordinance for existing buildings, specifically focusing on the easy to electrify systems where heat pump equipment is readily available and feasible. There are many circumstances where exemptions may apply, with a few notable ones being electric resistance is allowed in certain small or point-of-use water heaters, electric resistance elements in heat pumps or recirculation loop temperature maintenance, high-temperature water heating systems, and that a project may utilize electric resistance water heating if a performance compliance path is pursued. In the existing building section of the code, there are new mandatory requirements for when certain existing HVAC and water heating equipment is being replaced. The equipment these requirements apply to are gas-fired warm air furnaces being replaced with a new gas-fired warm air furnace, unitary air conditioners or condensing units being replaced with a like-for-like system, and gas-fired storage or instantaneous water heaters being replaced with new gas-fired storage or instantaneous water heaters. These requirements are set in place to align the 2022 Denver Energy Code with the Energized Denver Ordinance permitting requirements. Carried over from the 2019 Denver Energy Code, multifamily dwelling units are still to be included in interior lighting power density calculations. New in the 2022 Denver Energy Code, sleeping units such as dormitories are also now to be included in interior lighting power density calculations. Lighting power densities, or watts per square foot, limits have been decreased for both sleeping units and dwelling units. A new mandatory requirement for electrical energy monitoring has been added to the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This requirement states that electrical consumption data of various energy use load categories must be measured, monitored, recorded, and reported separately for new buildings with a gross conditioned floor area of 25,000 square feet and greater. Mandatory electric vehicle requirements have been modified in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Language and definitions were updated to align with national level code language. EVSE installed station quantities were increased in the new code. Overall, EV infrastructure requirements were decreased through the reduction of EV-capable spaces. Note that there are universal parking space requirements in the Denver Commercial Building Code, Section 1107, that must be met in conjunction with the electric vehicle charging requirements in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Electric-ready infrastructure is a new mandatory provision in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. When certain fossil fuel appliances and equipment connections are installed in new buildings, additional electric infrastructure must be installed to provide an easier path for future electrification. Applicable fossil fuel appliances and equipment are listed in the table on this slide. The additional electric infrastructure requirements include, but are not limited to, junction boxes, raceway, and bus bar. 22 Denver Energy Code. Projects can comply via the prescriptive path or one of the three performance pathways. Prescriptive compliance requires that a project comply with the entirety of all applicable provisions in sections C402 through C406 and C408. Projects will need to comply with the additional efficiency credits in section C406. The new credit method is a change from the 2019 Denver Energy Code, where previously a project was to select 2 efficiency packages. The number of credits a project must comply with is dependent on building type and whether it is all electric or not. The reduced credit requirement for all electric properties is set in place to incentivize building electrification. Tallying the additional efficiency credits can be complex, so be sure to utilize the new C406.1 planning tool in the prescriptive checklist for the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Projects can choose from a variety of additional efficiency credit options. The amount of credits a project receives for a certain measure is dependent on occupancy type. Credits are weighted on the impact that a certain efficiency measure will have given the occupancy type. Some credits may not be allowed for certain occupancy types, and some are only allowed to be credited if the measure is not already required by code. An example of a measure that may already be code required is fault detection and diagnostics. Here you can see the additional efficiency credit option table continued. Projects complying via the performance pathway have 3 options for showing compliance using an energy model. Modified section C407 uses energy cost metrics compared to a baseline building. Appendix SE uses site energy metrics compared to a baseline building. Appendix PT uses site energy metrics compared to a performance target. Performance path projects must comply with all mandatory requirements of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Projects may claim up to 10% of their savings from on-site renewable energy. The performance pathways were calibrated to incentivize all electric buildings and set buildings up for success with Energize Denver, but do not guarantee compliance. Modified Section C407 and Appendix SE both use ASHRAE's 90.1 2019 Appendix G Performance Rating Method Energy Modeling Protocol. This modeling protocol uses natural gas for space heating energy in the baseline. The building performance factors as modified by PNNL for both Section C407 and Appendix SE incentivizes all electric properties. Appendix PT differs from modified Section C407 and Appendix SE by comparing proposed energy model site energy use to a performance target of site energy use intensity, or EUI, in units of kBTUs per square foot. This pathway may only be used by a limited list of building types. Target UI set forth by this performance pathway are lower than the Energize Denver performance targets, but do not guarantee actual operational compliance. The proposed energy model must use the Denver modeling rules and procedures and is not intended to be used for predictive modeling. Mandatory requirements of the 2022 Denver Energy Code are mandatory regardless of whether the project is pursuing the prescriptive pathway or one of the performance pathways. Projects utilizing a performance pathway must follow the mandatory provisions of ASHRAE 90.1 2019. Mandatory requirements can be found listed in Section C407.2 of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Here you will see the mandatory requirements listed in Section C407.2 continued. Thank you for tuning into this training. For the full 2022 Denver Energy Code, please visit denvergov.org/building code. For Energy Code questions, please email energy.reviews@denvergov.org.